banks care about. They don't want you to pay back the loan, because they'd have then just the problem of finding somebody else to lend it to. They don't want you to pay back your loan. They want you to pay the interest on the loan and keep those loans going forever. And finally, when people have trouble making those interest payments, and it looks like the bank is going to have to write it off of its books, what happens? They go to Congress. And they say, well, this corporation that's having trouble making its interest payments, we can't let that corporation fold, because look how many thousands of jobs would be lost and people would go on welfare. There would be despair. We must protect the people. Or if it's a third world country that can't make its interest payments anymore, they say, well, we can't allow that to happen. We must make those payments for them in some way or another, because if that venerable bank had to write that huge loan off of its books, it would technically be bankrupt. And if it were bankrupt, it might have to close its doors. If that bank were to fall, it's such a huge bank, it'd be like a domino, and it might knock the other banks down too, and we could have a major economic crisis on our hands, and look how the people would suffer. And so Congress dutifully always responds. Remember, Congress is the partner in this scam. Always rushes in and says, yes, we can't allow those bad things to happen to the people. And so they vote the money to guarantee the loans or make outright payments in some very creative fashions so that the interest can continue flowing to the banks. Some of the more memorable games you may have missed over the recent years: Penn Central Railroad was bailed out in 1970, Lockheed Corporation that same year, Commonwealth Bank of Detroit in 1972, New York City in 1975, Chrysler in 1978, First Pennsylvania Bank in 1980, Continental Illinois, the largest of the banks so far, in 1982, and of course we know how many third world countries out there have had their debts funded. The money comes from the IMF World Bank so they can continue making their payments. And the IMF World Bank gets their money from the Federal Reserve System, and the Federal Reserve System gets it from us in the form of that mandrake mechanism and the hidden tax called inflation, or direct taxes in some cases. The Federal Reserve System gets an A on its report card on all three of its true objectives. My final topic is a short one, and it has to do with usury. An interesting concept. Usury used to be defined in ancient times as interest on a loan, period. Any interest on any loan was usury. Well, it's been redefined in modern times as excessive interest on a loan, in view of the fact that when people earn their money and they save it, they sacrifice the use of it, and then they loan it to somebody else for their venture. They're entitled to some reasonable return on that sacrifice. Some interest return it seems fair and logical to most people. So the question today is excessive interest. What is that? It was Thomas Edison who said, "People who will not turn a shovelful of dirt on the project, nor contribute a pound of materials, will collect more money than will the people who will supply all the materials and do all the work." When I read that, I wondered if that was true. I took my calculator and I ran the numbers. You might try this sometime. If you assume a $100,000 home to be built, and the $30,000 is to go for the land and the architect's fees and the building permits, that kind of thing, $70,000 to go for the actual construction of the house, the materials and the labor. You assume further that the buyer goes to the bank, puts 20% down, takes out a 10% loan for 30 years. Punch in the numbers, and you will see that he will pay to the bank in interest $172,741, compared to $70,000 for labor and materials. In other words, as Edison said, 2.5 times more will be paid to the banks who did nothing than for those who provided all the labor and all the materials. And you may say, well, yeah, that's true, but don't forget the time value of money. Reasonable interest is rational. People need to be compensated for the sacrifice of their money over 30 years. That's a long period of time. Wait a minute. Not this money, ladies and gentlemen. Nobody earned this money. Nobody saved this money. Nobody sacrificed anything for this money. This money was created out of nothing. And I suggest that $172,741 interest on nothing is excessive. I think we need to focus on this issue. We need a new definition of the word usury. Any interest on any loan of fiat money, meaning money created out of nothing. Now this example of $172,741 unearned interest on a $100,000 home is like a grain of sand in the Sahara. Look around the desert. All of the other homes of America, all the factories, all the machinery in the factories, all of the high-rise buildings, the hotels, all the airplanes, the automobiles, the farm equipment, the farm structures, everything that we have, we're looking at a similar relationship here. This is staggering. To consider the amount of money that is in this huge, wide river of wealth flowing into the banking cartel because the money was created out of nothing. It's such a wide river of wealth, you can't even think across it in your mind. It's perpetually moving into the banking cartel. This is a dead short across the productive capacity of America. This is money that should be going to the people who produce and who create, instead of being siphoned off through a scam. Think of what our standard of living could be if it weren't for this dead short across our economy. Well, where is this money going? This river, where is it flowing? You get the mental picture that maybe it's going into a lake somewhere or behind a dam. All this money is rising, accumulating. People are getting richer and richer and richer. No, not so. It's not how it works. They're spending the money. What are they spending it for? Well, they're not spending it for more yachts and more mansions. That's not it. I mean, they got rid of the mansions back on Jekyll Island. They got bored with those things. Once a person has all the money that they can possibly use for the material pleasures of life, what is left? Sure, power. Absolutely. They are spending this money for power, ladies and gentlemen, to acquire power over you and me and our children. They are literally buying up the world with it. But I don't mean they're buying up the real estate or the hardware. They're buying up control over people. Technically, in sociological terms, they're buying control over the power centers, which means those groups and institutions through which people live and work and follow leadership and accept information. People are always associated in groups, and they work in groups, they move in groups. And these groups have heads of them, leaders. And this money has been going for many years to acquire influence, if not control, over the leaders of these power centers in society. So they can, therefore, indirectly influence and control you and me. Specifically, that means they have been spending this river of wealth very freely to buy control over politicians, political parties, television networks, cable networks, newspapers, magazines, publishers, wire services, motion picture studios, universities, labor unions, church organizations, trade associations, labor unions, tax-exempt foundations, multinational corporations, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, you name it. Make your own list. I guarantee you, if you have a large, influential organization which influences people, you will find that this river of wealth has been flowing partly into a